Thank you, Omi, and thank you all for coming out here tonight. Really appreciate it. I know it's a little bit of a walk. It seems like everything in this conference is spread out a little bit. So I'm here to talk to you today about the global estimates for hepatitis B and hepatitis delta, as the homie said. Now, we've reviewed over 40,000 articles, posters, MOH reports, and gray literature. And a lot of this also occurred because of our contacts that we already made through our work in hepatitis C, as well as we've been making additional contacts in PAHO, particularly, working with more Latin American countries, ministries of health, to get more data. Based on historical prevalence from 127 countries, we found that we estimate that there's 385 million surface antigen positive individuals in the world, prevalence of 5.2%. Now this is without adjusting for the time of study and the impact of vaccination. In our methodology as well, we made sure to exclude anything prior to 1985, and when we got into our modeling aspect, we excluded anything prior to 1990. Now, we modeled a total of 89 countries, so 82.8% of the total infections that we estimate in the world were modeled. 17 countries we have recent data for that we were able to use just the reported prevalences due to having being large serosurveys and covering all age groups that are necessary. 8.5% of the published data that we have was unusable, and so we ended up extrapolating approximately 14.8% of infections. So if we look at our HPV models that are based on all the recent data, you see, of course, China has almost 100 million surface antigen infections currently. Now, where data is most lacking is Africa. And part of this is because we do exclude blood donors inside of all of our work. And though there is blood donor study, most of the focus in Africa is on HPV, HIV co-infection. And so getting good general population estimates has been difficult. Once we adjust with the model for vertical transmission and horizontal transmission, we are currently estimating that in 2016 there are 310 million hepatitis B individuals with an overall prevalence of 4.2%. Now this is significantly higher than other estimates. We're just slightly above the most recent Schweitzer article that was 248 within our confidence interval. And this is largely due to us excluding patients, blood donors, as well as non-representative populations. That are not able to really give us a good picture of what the whole country is looking like. In addition, we only look at national studies, and we don't include, a lot of people have been surprised when we presented some of our data that the Amazon region is so green over in South America. Now, if you look at the statistics, there are some groups within the Amazon that have very high prevalences. However, these groups only account for very small percentages of the total population, so their impact on the total prevalence is relatively small. From our work, we found that 10 countries account for 70% of all hepatitis B infections in the world. China, and then followed by India, Indonesia, and Nigeria. We also examined hepatitis E, HVEAG, the E antigen, and we found that we estimate that there's about 30% of surface antigen positive individuals in the world are also E antigen positive. Now, we got this data from 51 different countries, which represents 69% of the world's population. And these are all the extrapolated data as well. Now, what's interesting is obviously very high, which is well known in East Asia as well as the Pacific region. And we also found a fairly high E antigen in Africa, as well as, of course, the Americas, while it was low in Russia and Western Europe and Eastern Europe. Hepatitis delta, we found reports in 71 countries representing 74% of the world's population. And with delta, it's mainly in Russia and Central Asia has the highest prevalences, whereas Latin America and China actually has a very, very low prevalence. So in conclusion, we estimate that currently there's 310 surface antigen positive individuals in the world. Only 10 countries would count for 70% of the global infection, and 30% of all surface antigen individuals are E antigen positive as well. with 8% of surface antigen individuals being anti-HDV. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Thank you, Devin. This is really great. There wasn't a lot of data on hepatitis B. Can you go back to the slide where you showed data by countries? I think it was previous slide. For Pakistan, yeah, so it's 2.5%. So that's what I was kind of trying to understand, whether Pakistan has a lower prevalence compared to India and even Bangladesh, which kind of looks quite, well, it's Myanmar, sorry, not Bangladesh. So yeah, so that's fine. And another thing that I noticed in North America, E antigen was red. So is that related to availability of data for testing, or is the true prevalence of E antigen in North America way higher than any other place?
It's not way higher. Oops. It's not way higher than any other place. It's actually very similar to China and East Asia. And as hepatitis B is so low within North America, we think part of the reason that could be is because of so many of the hepatitis B infections in the United States and Canada in particular are in immigrants. So then when you're studying the population of S positive, there's going to be a higher weight towards that, which is why the antigen would be higher.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like in BC, we have, like, most of our chronic infections are in immigrants from China and other Asian countries, and acute infections are mainly in high-risk populations. Thank you.
Oh, about Pakistan. So Pakistan, we use Qureshi 2010, which is the 2.5%. And it is lower than India. One of the issues that we've had with hepatitis B that seems to be more apparent in hepatitis B than hepatitis C is the heterogeneous nature of the distribution of prevalence. So in Pakistan, you can have areas that are only 1% prevalence, and then you have regions that are 8% prevalence. What we attempt to do is use national estimates to really give an idea of what the national picture can be, even though I know some countries aren't completely comfortable with that because they feel it masks the true problem within certain provinces. But as far as us from a global perspective, being able to compare it, that's, yeah.
Thank you. Good presentation. You told that you excluded the blood donors studies, which makes sense. But I was wondering, well, you definitely know that the studies on blood donors are much more actually existing in the countries. I was wondering if it is more practical if you develop a model to estimate the actual prevalence of blood donors instead of having this, because the other step probably in your project is update these estimates every so often. Then you need to spend a lot of time of heavy effort to update this data. But if you do, I was wondering if, for example, there is a model to estimate the actual prevalence of the blood donors, it is easier to get updated because the blood donors of data are more frequent and maybe more practical. I don't know.
So the blood donor data is very available. Now, part of the issue with it is that everywhere has different protocols for how they screen blood donors. You can actually see prevalence drop in countries by blood donors when they change the protocols of who's allowed to donate blood. So as they become more restrictive, it goes down. In many countries, you have paid blood donors as well. So it is possible to do a regression analysis to really track what blood donors would be. But if you've looked at the HOPE papers, what they've really shown is that these multipliers, they try to apply multipliers to the blood donor population and the overall prevalence, and they're all over the map. So you really would have to take into account so many different factors that would be individualized that in the end, while it is possible, it might take more work to just build that model to do the regression of the blood donors, and you might end up with a very similar prevalence just from looking at general population estimates.
Yes, thank you very much and congratulations. My question is regarding if you can click to the HDV, the hepatitis delta. So I'm a little bit astonished about this data, and my question is it because is there not a high level of reporting of hepatitis delta cases? Because I've expected more. And the second question, I think that would be perfect because you model things as of course for HCV but also for HBV is to, if you have made a lot of research, do you know about the stages, the fibrosis stages, cirrhotic stages of the populations and extrapolate and model the risk to develop cancer, for example? Is it something your data is good enough to start modeling such calculations as well?
That we're actually almost finished with the health policy tool very similar to our hepatitis C model for hepatitis B. And our perinatal transmission has been finalized, and it takes into account aging, liver-related deaths, as well as for cirrhosis, HCC, and really tracking the progression of, well, what's needed for that is good epidemiological data. So we've only really been doing that in countries that have good age distributions, as well as have a good general population estimate. And to your point for HDV, I do believe that there isn't just a ton of interest in it right now. There's been a lot of interest in specific groups within the Amazon once again, which would be red. There's some groups going back to the 80s in Colombia that they say that 60%, 80%, very, very high prevalences. However, it's really small specialized populations that there's studies in, which we can't really use on national estimates. So it's a valid point. Thank you.
Thank you. This question actually relates to both presentations. I'm wondering, going forward, which countries and regions present the greatest challenges in terms of obtaining robust data? It's great that you have the data that you did from so many countries, but which are the most problematic gaps, and what are your strategies for addressing those gaps? As I said, I'd be curious too about HCV, and also whether there are synergies in your efforts to, if there are some countries where both warrant attention.
The biggest gap for us with hepatitis B in particular has been Africa, and that was historically our problem with hepatitis C as well. We've been able to fill in those gaps a little better, and we'll be working to do that with hepatitis B as well. One of the greatest assets we have is working with doctors in specific countries and meeting with ministries of health and actually talking to them, because a lot of times people do have data that they haven't published, or they have a total diagnosis, and so from that you can extrapolate better and more easily than you can from blood measures what the prevalences are. And so through the next few months, we are going to be working with African countries to try to fill in some of those holes for hepatitis B in particular. Now, would we love to see a national serosurvey, a random sample in every single country? Yeah, that would be great, and that's what we really need. And broken down by age as well, especially with hepatitis B, it's very important because to track the modeling, especially perinatal transmission, you see a sharp decrease the first time that a woman who was vaccinated as an infant becomes a mother. Then it's a cascade effect, and you continue to see a decrease. But you need to have those younger ages, as well as women of childbearing age, really set in stone to get good estimates of what the future burden will be.
May I ask you to follow up within Africa? Where are you encountering the greatest challenges? Or where might there be some happy surprises in terms of what data are available?
I know we've been working with Nigeria pretty closely now, and Cameroon. We actually, one of our colleagues was just in Cameroon over the weekend, meeting with some experts to try to get more data. I believe we've worked with South Africa in the past for hepatitis B. I believe that they will have data. They have a huge serosurvey, however, it's only in one province, and not fully representative of the nation. And that is, so much of the interest in Africa is HIV. And so almost all hepatitis B studies are, as well as hepatitis C, are linked to co-infection. And so really finding just serosurveys that focus on the general population has been really difficult. doesn't
Yes, I know.
quite, yeah.
So HIV oddly, HIV, excuse me, actually gets in the way of it in this effort.
Do you want to, yeah, please.
And I'll add just a bit to that, but definitely echoing Devin's sentiments. Africa and Latin America are two of the regions where we've still got quite a bit of work to do. And with hepatitis C, it's actually interesting because hepatitis B often takes priority to hepatitis C in Africa as well. So, I guess if we're saying HIV kind of is the forefront, then hepatitis B tends to come next. So we have had some good success in Ethiopia, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Ghana, and in South Africa as well, but really, and Egypt as well. But outside of those countries, we've had a bit more of a challenge finding good studies and also finding individuals who are interested in